Hello everyone and welcome to the Job Hunting Podcast. I'm Renata Bernardi, your host, and in this podcast I give you tips, advice, and I interview experts to help you nail your next job and have the best career, a career that ties your dreams and your life together and not only pays for your bills but also moves you towards your goals and your future aspirations. I want this podcast to be a one-stop shop for you, career enthusiasts, job hunters, veterans that are facing career disruption and transition, rising stars who want to learn as much as they can to enable their career progressions and goals. Here you will hear from experts and professionals that came before you, are a few years or decades ahead of you, and have great stories and examples to share on how they have achieved their career goals. Today we have Paul Burrows, and the goal for him was to become financial independent and having the ability to make choices about where and when he wanted to retire or how much him and his wife wanted to work. Paul is now financially independent, and a few years ago he decided it was time for him to retire. He has been a great mentor to other professionals and has a keen interest in career development. So I believe he is a great fit for this podcast, both with his career experience and knowledge, as well as by having the right mindset of giving back and helping others achieve their best. If you're not yet subscribed to this podcast, please do so wherever you are listening right now, be it YouTube, iTunes, or Spotify. You should subscribe and keep in touch. You can also subscribe to be part of my community, and if you do so, I will send you a newsletter every week with the new podcast episodes. They will land in your inbox, together with important news and announcements from me, services that I'm providing my clients that you might want to sign up to, and some extra resources that I curate specifically for my community. In fact, Paul has been very good as my friend in helping me curate those resources and sending me great articles to share with my community. By subscribing to my newsletter, it's really the easiest and cheapest way for you to action your career strategy and continue to invest in your professional development. It will keep you accountable and keep your career planning top of mind for you. To take a step further and speed up the results for your career progression, you should contact me for a career strategy session. Now, for a limited time, everyone who is subscribed to my community is invited to book a free consultation with me. So make sure that you subscribe. This is a 60 to 70 minute career strategy session. The link for you to book that consultation is the link to join, to subscribe to my community, and once you do that, you will access my booking calendar. So you will find that link in the episode show notes. Now, a disclaimer that we will be talking about early retirement, becoming financially independent, but this is not financial advice. The information in this podcast is general in nature, does not take into account your personal circumstances, financial needs, and objectives. So before acting on any information, you should consider if it's appropriate to you, and in particular, you should see an independent advisor. Okay, so this is really about sharing with you career stories and making you aspire and become ambitious for your own career goals. I hope you enjoy this interview with my friend Paul Burrows to talk about becoming financially independent. Paul will also talk about career transition, retirement, and his redundancy experience. So it's a really rich podcast interview, and I hope you enjoy it. So let's begin. Paul, why don't you tell us a little bit about your background, your career, and what you did?
Okay, so I'll start right at the beginning because it is relevant to what we're talking about. So I went to school in Sydney, and I left school after doing my high school certificate, and I thought when I left there was a 3 or 4 month gap between then and potentially going to university, and I got a job in a shipping company in Sydney. And for better or for worse, I actually enjoyed it so much, and I enrolled at Arts at Sydney University, and I didn't go because I was enjoying work so much, and that's really where my focus was at the time. So I stayed in shipping for a couple of years and changed companies that I was with in different roles across the shipping industry, and really enjoyed it. It was outdoors, that you got to go down to ships and you saw interesting people, and it was an international business. So, absolutely fantastic. After that, I got the opportunity to actually move to a small company as a shipbroker. So effectively matching up ships with cargo, and that transitioned as a business also into oil trading. So we used to buy and sell fuel all over the world to supply ships. And a long story short, I ended up owning a 30% or a third of that business. And we were, at the time, leaders in the world, even though we were a small company. We had a small office in Singapore. So it was a lot of fun, and, quite a lot of international travel involved. So, lots of fun doing that. And as it turned out, probably 12 months after I, had ownership in that business, BHP approached me really out of the blue and somewhat unexpected, although in saying that, we were a major, customer of BHP buying fuel from them. Mm-hmm. And they asked me to a meeting up in Sydney, and BHP at the time had bought a refinery in Hawaii, believe it or not. So it was actually the head of marketing over in Hawaii that asked me to come along, and I thought initially it was really just to say thanks for the business. But at lunch he actually, said, we're interested in hiring you to actually start up a physical oil trading business for BHP in Australia, which was a bit of a surprise. And to be honest with you, I thought leaving a private enterprise on my own firm and going to work for BHP was like joining the public service. But he did say, would you like, we'd like you to come over to Hawaii and meet the management over there. Well, that was too tempting to say no to.
Yeah, he was schmoozing
so I booked my flights, and tremendous. So I booked really I said to Jim at the time, how long can I stay for? Which was probably my motivation at the time more so, and but it did prick my interest as well. So I went over to Hawaii, met people over there, and then they said, we'd like you to go to Melbourne and meet the management down there. And before you know it, I got a fantastic offer, and there I was. So really, that was a startup business, and I was only 27, when that started. So I was only relatively young and probably a little bit naive, but I was, very fortunate being a specialist in the field that, there was a limited amount of people, certainly in Australia and probably in the world, that, that they could have picked from. So that was tremendous. I started that business and from scratch, and it did very well, I must say, and I absolutely loved it. So I was in that business for 6 or 7 years, and then I got the opportunity to go over to Perth and live in Perth and run BHP's logistics business over in Western Australia and up in the Northern Territory. And I chose to do that to really broaden my career from very much a commercial focus to an operational focus. So I was going from oil trading and shipping to, looking after ships, trucks and trains. So that was great. And I probably did that for 4 or 5 years before another opportunity came up in BHP to move back to Melbourne and head up a consulting group which looked at logistics solutions for our global minerals business. So that was a bit different and a job that was interesting, but wasn't me. It didn't have a P&L and didn't have a bottom line. And after about 3 years, Billiton came in and merged with BHP. And at that point in time, there were dramatic changes in the company. And I could have either have gone overseas and worked in Singapore or Rotterdam, or I had the opportunity of taking a package. So while it was frightening to some extent, you couldn't get the smile off my face, having been there for 11 years.
I remember
it was a
that's
great
when we met.
opportunity.
You were very happy.
I was happy, but nervous at the same time.
Yes.
And after taking that, and I suppose it was a bit of a shock at the time because it was somewhat unexpected. And then you start to wonder, well, what am I going to do now? And there's all sorts of insecurities, and then you feel a little bit, unsure as to what you're going to do. And I had an outplacement, group that BHP provided, which I found to some extent useful, but also frustrating at the same time. And I quickly realised that, the only way that I was going to move forward was to actually do it myself and not rely on these people or the advice that they were, necessarily providing me. And I nearly got a couple of roles in the same, industry, but, for various reasons, they didn't come to fruition. And I thought to myself, well, what do I really want to do? And, I always read the Financial Review every day, and I decided that I'd actually change industries altogether and get into banking and financial and investment advice. So at the time, my lovely wife, Penny, we had young kids and wasn't working. So Penny decided that she'd actually go back to work, and she works as a theatre nurse in hospitals. And I would study for 12 months to get my financial planning qualifications, which is what I did. At the same time, landscape my backyard.
I remember that. And you pulled your carpet as well, I remember.
Yes, I did all sorts of things, and study was in the middle of all of that. But so it was a good year, and I went to pick up at school, and I suppose bonded with the kids more. And when I finished that, I started to apply for positions, and not knowing really what companies to join or how it all worked. This was probably 20 years ago, and it was, to some extent a growing business. But I applied to a couple of the banks, and I thought to myself, I don't know the difference between one or the other, so the first person, hopefully, that offers me a position I'll take. And that happened to be with the Commonwealth Bank. And the whole objective in that year too, with Penny going back to work, was not to waste my redundancy, but to actually try to keep as much of that money as we could, to move forward and get ahead. So I started working for the CBA, and I was on 30% of my salary that I was on at BHP. So that was fine because I had the confidence that, I knew that, like in any industry, if you do well, you'll rise to the top. And it was an opportunity for me to some extent, to prove that I could do it again. Because I was, BHP, I was in a fairly senior position, especially for my age, and I didn't think it was a fluke. So I thought if I go there, I don't really care what I'm on as long as I get into the business and have a go. So I stayed at CBA for 18 months, and, it taught me an awful lot. I had a great boss at the time who really showed me the ropes, but it was a big transition coming in from a senior management position, effectively, to the bottom rung of a new industry. And I went to meetings, what I thought was to, input and improve the business and give thoughts, but it took me about 18 months to realise I was just there to be told what to do. So that was
very humbling, isn't it, Paul?
Oh, very much so. And there's nobody to give any work to. Any work needs to be done by you. So, and there was no delegation because there was nobody to delegate to. So it was different, but really quite exhilarating, to be in a new industry. And there were lots of learnings and quite refreshing. So after that, I probably having a bad day, and we had the free MX newspaper on the train, and it had an ad in there for a senior financial planning role through a recruiting company, and I applied for that. And the next day probably got better, but before you know it, the ball was rolling, and I was in discussions, with the headhunter who introduced me to the ultimate employer, which was NAB, in the business bank. So I joined them, and it certainly at that point in time wasn't my extensive, investment or financial planning advice or career that got me that job. It was more my business background. So I stayed there for 11 years and absolutely loved it, dealing with business people, giving advice to business owners and companies and boards. And I built, quite a successful practice, and loved it there. So things changed a little bit at NAB at that point in time, and while it was a big decision, I decided I'd leave. And at that point in time, I was probably in my early 50s, and I wasn't going to particularly, go back to work. So that's sort of when this all started, but didn't end because ANZ Private Bank, where they've got their wealthier customers, actually approached me to go and work for them. So I was only effectively retired at that point in time for a week before I started, and I just thought it was just too good an opportunity and something totally different to what I'd seen before.
Yes.
So I joined ANZ in their Melbourne office, and I was there for 18 months before I just decided, that the industry had changed, that much, and I really wasn't. It wasn't ANZ. I enjoyed ANZ, but the industry itself, I really, wasn't enjoying as I should.
Yes.
So that's when I decided to leave ANZ and, effectively, not work or decide, what I wanted to do. And since then, that was probably 4 or 5 years ago. Since then, I've done some contracting, but I've reached the point now in the last year or so where I've decided that I'm not going to work again. So that's me done.
That's interesting. Paul, throughout this whole time, even from an early age, did you have the goal of retiring early? Was that something that you thought about and prepared for along the way?
I'm told I did. My mother-in-law and my wife said I was planning this ever since I was 25. So
why do you think they think that? What made them lead to think that?
Well, probably in the way that I behaved and, what I did. And I suppose I had to explain my actions to somebody and to some extent they were correct, but it may have been perceived. It's interesting because, you say you retire and everybody looks at you as though you're strange. And it's not about retirement. What it was all about was financial independence. And what financial independence brings you is choice.
Yes.
So, what I've achieved is financial independence, and I've chosen not to work. But, had I not got to that point, I wouldn't have the choice and I'd have to be working. And to me, that would be, hell, and that would be a nightmare. So the idea was to get to that point, as soon as I possibly could. And Penny, my wife, obviously has the choice to not work, and I'd love her not to work, but she's chosen that she'd like to work 3 days a week.
Yeah.
And it's more because she enjoys what she does, and it's also the social interaction, which I don't feel I need. So that's what was the driver, along this whole journey.
And did you develop that planning of being financially independent after you started studying for your financial planning certificate, or were you always very careful and strategic about that?
No, it was way before that. I joined BHP when I was 27, and I think it all started to happen when I was 25 after starting work at 18. So it started before that, and we've always been fairly conservative in what we've done, and I've always thought, I was very fortunate to get the BHP position. I worked very hard and I was successful, but I didn't live a high-flying life, which I very well could have. And we've always been fairly conservative, and I've always had the view that I wanted to reward myself for all the hard work by saving each month.
That's a great concept. Yeah.
Well, most people would say I'm going to reward myself for the hard work and start spending, which as an advisor, I saw over and over again. So this is normal behaviour, but, I've tried not to be normal and I've tried not to be conventional because you start to go down that path and you end up like everybody else. And, that's just not a good way to be.
Yes. And you are a great mentor to your kids. You have 3 boys, and also to younger people coming into the profession, financial advisors and people that I know that you've mentored before. What would you say to somebody who is 25 or in their early 30s and is keen to start developing this plan of being financially independent at an early age? What would you say to them are the key things they need to consider?
Yeah, well, the first thing I'd say is that it's never too late if you're older. You can do amazing things, but obviously the sooner you start, the easier it is and the better it is. But I think you need to have the right mindset, and I think you need the right motivation, and you need a financial goal. So you need to feel passionate about it, because at the end of the day, there are sacrifices to be made, and it's not exciting. It's somewhat boring, to be doing this. But, I can assure people, that it's really worthwhile, and it gives you security and some comfort that, nobody can do things to you. And if they do things to you, then you're in a position of strength that you can take time and think about what you're going to do itself. The other thing I've always been an advocate of is to buy quality, at a discount price. So that applies to, to every asset, that you buy. So you don't need lots of things, but you need quality things that, that last. And you can always buy those, things at a discount. And I'll use some examples of that, potentially as we go on. And I think the other thing you need to look at is what are you doing, and should you continue to do that? So that applies not only to your financial situation, but it also applies to your career and your job.
Yes.
And I think there are so many people that beaver at what they're doing, but they don't really look up and say, well, am I doing the right thing? And, should I really be doing this? And from a career perspective, you've only got so many jobs that you're going to be doing in your lifetime, and you need to be somewhat strategic about those and pick the right jobs that are actually going to add to your skills and get you to where you want to go.
Yes. One thing that I teach when I do the Reset Your Career webinars, which I've done earlier this year, is I talk about having a minimum income that you would accept when you go into a transition period like you did, right? So if you if you know what your minimum budget is, then it's easier for you to make career transitions like you've done, because you know how low you can go and not be in financial stress, right? Did you consider that when you changed careers? You mentioned that briefly about not wasting your redundancy, and then knowing that you were accepting a salary that was lower than the one from your previous career, but understanding that that's what it took. So did you have any sort of strategic way that you thought about that in terms of your budget? I mean, you were a family, you have wife and kids at the time. How did you work that out for yourself?
Well, it was probably all the groundwork I did before it happened. And I just thank my lucky stars that, we took that path, because, money really wasn't the driver. And I was in a fortunate position where it didn't need to be the driver. And in fact, I thought it was rather funny that that's all they were paying me. But I was confident, as I said before, I did my research, and I knew I was passionate about, the industry that I was in, and I was excited about it. And I knew that there was potential to do significantly better. So I had confidence in my skills and my ability to, be reasonably sure that, that wasn't going to last forever. Yes. And I think with all of the, experience I had, in my own business and in BHP, it counted for nothing, in getting a first role in financial planning. So, nobody was particularly interested in those skills. It counted
for something in your second role, didn't it?
I did, absolutely, and it accelerated my, my second career as an advisor because of all that experience and knowledge that I had, and my ability to relate to other business people. So, and I knew that was the case, and it was beyond me to some extent when I was applying for positions that, there was no acknowledgement of that. But nobody can take away all of that experience and knowledge and training, that you've been put through, and it shouldn't be underestimated.
Yes. One of the things that I thought you did very strategically was to choose an educational pathway into the profession that's needed. Some people go and do career transitions, but they think that they need a very generic executive education program, whereas you identify that you really needed that certificate to enable you to do the career transition, which is a very...
Well, it was legislatively required.
Yes. And my advice for people that are living under their redundancy packages, if it's not legally required, then you don't need it. Would you agree?
No. No. To an extent, I think what I realised after I left, my general manager role in BHP, that what companies are not looking for is generalists. They're looking for, people that can come in at a senior role and solve a problem. So unless you've got those very specific problem solving skills that the company is exactly looking for, it's unlikely that you're going to land another senior job. So what I realised is that, the key to this is to become a specialist. And so you need to, one, have the skills and the aptitude for the position, and potentially if you need the qualification and the training, obviously you need to go out and get that. But if you're a specialist, and especially if you're a revenue earner, you're indispensable. So you'll never lose your job again, and you'll always be paid and highly valued by a business. So that was my view on thinking about it and thinking about what I wanted to do.
Yes. Now I want to pivot a little bit the conversation to talk in more general terms. I mean, your story is from somebody who at a very young age did really well in terms of accessing high-paying jobs in the corporate sector and so on. So that path I don't want people to think that the path into financial independence of early retirement is only for people that have your career path.
No, not at all.
Yes. So, it's really about that idea of understanding the budget that you have to live with and planning your lifestyle around the income level that you have. And you can retire at any income level. Would you agree? And how would you advise somebody that is on a lower
Not retire, financial independence is what we need to be talking about.
Yes, okay, right.
Yeah, so, and I saw a lot of this, obviously, as an advisor. I saw, hundreds of people and all from different backgrounds with different jobs and income levels. And it's not necessarily what you earn, it's what you do with it.
Yeah.
And my heroes, in my investment advice have been people with quite ordinary salaries and ordinary jobs, but they had an unbelievable strength and mindset, and a lot stronger than mine. I just admired them so much. One was a foreman and safety coordinator on a building site, and he was a multi-millionaire, but a very ordinary guy. To look at. Another one was a very small, builder who was in his 80s when I got involved because he wanted somebody to come and help administer his portfolio. But again, millions of dollars, but from a very modest start. Yeah. And on the flip side, I've seen, some people on a $1.5 million salary that spent everything, believe it or not, every month and had very little, in the way of wealth. And so, the thing to think about is that, being wealthy is not about income. Income, may look like wealth because you've got lots of money to spend, but true wealth is, creation of assets, houses and shares and superannuation. And, while everybody's working, everybody's at the dance, but it's as soon as the music stops that, is the big differentiator as to, what lifestyle you lead, and that's really, that's really the key. And, you see people in, fancy cars and they're probably all on lease. You hear people with, 10 houses and you become very impressed until you realise that it's all debt. So that's not wealth. And I think a lot of people on very high incomes, think it's never going to end. And they spend, but, it always ends. And those people, do look back and have terrible regrets about, well, what did I do? And it's too late. So it's not what you earn, it's what you do with it. And, tax in Australia is a great leveller. So the take-home pay of somebody on a medium income or on a higher income, in the hand is not a huge difference.
That's a good point. Yeah, especially in Australia. Yeah. All right, my friend, I think we spoke quite a lot. Is there any other advice you would give your younger self if you could go back and do a little bit differently? What would you do? Or maybe nothing. That's fine too.
No. I do a lot differently, Renata. I think the biggest mistake I made was actually not getting a degree when I should have.
Okay.
And it's a double-edged sword.
Uh-huh.
I think that was one of the reasons why I worked so hard, because around me I had people who'd, been in the industry probably a lot longer than I had for the position I was in, and they all had degrees. And I always knew in the back of my mind I didn't have a degree, and I did go back and study later, and I've studied all of my life since then. But I think to get a degree and qualifications early is a really good thing. And you've got the piece of paper, you've got the qualification, and then you can concentrate, on your career. So that would be, one thing that I've always regretted. And I think I've taken most opportunities that have come my way, but there are a few instances where there were opportunities there and I didn't grab them. So I have some regrets about that, because it could have taken me down, a different path. And one example of that, when I was in a shipping company, the general manager, came to me and said, somebody that would be a really good export manager. And I think his response from me would have been, yes, me. But I went down the track of recommending a whole lot of other people. So, there are little instances like that you look back on and say, I should have done that, done that differently. So, and I've made investment mistakes.
Yeah. No, I think overall it seems like you were pretty focused.
Yeah, well, apparently I was. That's what people tell me, but it didn't seem like that at the time. It's just what I did. And, I've made investment mistakes as well, but not serious ones. And I think in becoming financially independent, it's really important, not to make mistakes, because they're a great destroyer of wealth. And, we've all seen people, going to retail shops and, they pour an enormous amount of their savings into those sorts of ventures, and, a year or two later the shop's shut. And, I just feel very sorry for those people. That obviously hasn't been thought through, or, they just make mistakes. And I think, buying, just from a financial perspective, the only debt I've ever taken on is to buy a house. So I've never taken debt on to buy a car or go on a holiday, or, haven't had any credit card debt where I've incurred, any interest. So you need to be really smart about, using every dollar that you've earned and you've rewarded yourself from working so hard, and really think, carefully about, what you do with that dollar. And,
Very well, Paul. I think we've given people a lot to think about. Thank you so much for your time.
No, that's all right. Can I just say one more thing?
Of course.
Just to be careful here, that, and that's probably my financial planning background that drives this. This is all just general advice, and this has all been about, my story and what I've done. So I'd hate people to go out and say that's what I think I should do, because you really need, any advice that you get given to be tailored to your personal circumstances. So I just, put out that general warning.
Yes, and this was really about giving people a story, like you said, about somebody that has gone through career transitions and has had the opportunity to do many different things with their redundancy package, but, chose a specific path that was very successful. And it gives people hope and also examples of what they could do. But again, you're right. You have to tailor that to make sure it suits your needs, whoever is listening. Yeah. But also it's good to hear about somebody who has been focused and had a mindset and a goal, and financial independence is something that a lot of the listeners would be seeking to build for their own lives. So that's a good story for them to listen to, Paul. Thank you so much.
Yeah, good. No, it was my pleasure, Renata. Lovely to talk to you.
Okay.